Hey, sixth graders, it's Mrs. Ward, and we're going to read chapter 9 from Sparrowhawk Red. So, if you remember, Ricky was just meeting that girl that was following him around. So, we're going to find out more about her. Chapter 9. Ricky woke to her silent gaze. In the brisk dawn air, she sat across the alley, picking idly at her fingernails. She regarded him with big, curious eyes. Ricky scowled and sat upright. For the first time, the light allowed a good look at this Ratera who had followed him. She wore only a bleached flour sack, with a length of twine snugged tightly at her waist. Her skinny arms and neck poked out through ragged holes, and her thick hair hung in matted strands. Scars crossed her arms and legs, strange scars, parallel to each other. Ricky squinted hard. "Who are you?" he queried in Spanish. She did not answer, but instead grinned boldly, seeming proud of herself. This bothered Ricky. What was there to be proud of? He examined her more closely. Her fingernails were cracked and broken. A fresh pink thistle bloom gleamed in her black hair. "Who are you?" Ricky demanded again. She became suddenly bashful, looking down and fingering her pudgy nose. "Soledad," she offered, her voice barely a whisper. Then she peeked up with an impish smile. Ricky couldn't be mad, but still he eyed her cautiously. Her name Soledad meant solitude or alone. "And who are you?" she whispered. "Ricardo." Ricky used his Spanish name. She looked quizzically at him and then blurted, "You don't look so good. Someone really screwed up your hair." "I look bad?" She nodded, smiling. "See." Ricky sat speechless. Arguing with a Ratera over looks seemed pointless. The morning sun broke above the buildings, touching the air with warmth. Ricky peeled off the itchy serape and folded it, handing it to Soledad. "Thanks, and thanks for the food." "The food was good, no?" Ricky nodded. Good for gopher bait, he thought. She glowed with self-importance. Stiffly, he stood and took a step. The sharp gravel bit into his feet. Oof. With a moan, he dropped to the ground and grabbed his toes. Soledad scrambled up. "You have gringo feet," she said. "Wait here." Before Ricky could argue, she took off running. Her bow-legged gait swayed her like a wind-up toy. The gravel and glass didn't bother her as she bobbed out of sight. Who was this crazy girl? And why was she helping? Gingerly, Ricky rubbed his sore ribs. A twinge of pain, oddly enough, caused him to chuckle. He'd taken a beating all right, but it could have been worse. And somewhere in Mariposa, 4 boys were waking up less than chipper. Of this, he was sure. Dad would have been proud. Or maybe not. Dad didn't like him to fight. He always said that it took a bigger person to stay out of a fight than to get into one. This was one time Ricky wished he really had been a bigger person, so he could have really thumped the bums. In minutes, Soledad returned. She reached inside the neck of her flour sack dress. "Look," she said, huffing to catch her breath. "Huaraches." She tossed a chunk of car tire on the ground. Next, she pulled out a strip of inner tube, a rusty spike, and an old knife wrapped in a rag. Ricky eyed her. Huaraches were sandals, but what was all this other junk? She dropped to her knees and reached for his ankle. "Give me your foot," she said, pressing the tire tread against the bottom of his foot and tracing out its pattern with the rusty nail. Using the old knife, she began hacking away at the thick rubber, her hands moving with intensity. Her chin jutted forward as she worked. Ricky watched. Whenever the thick rubber resisted, Soledad pursed her lips in concentration, gripped the knife harder, and attacked it. When her weary hands started to fumble, Ricky reached out and gently took hold of the knife and the rubber chunk. She conceded with a shy smile. As Ricky worked, she eyed him. Suddenly, she crossed the alley. There she squatted with her back to him. A puddle formed and flowed from between her ankles. Ricky turned away. Soon she returned, watching him work as if nothing had happened. "Why don't you go find a bathroom?" he said accusingly. Soledad shrugged. "I don't want a bath." She looked at him quizzically. "Do you always use the bathroom?" Ricky shook his head without answering. After he finished one sole, Soledad took it from him and twisted it at it with the rusty spike, her tongue bunched between her lips. Every few minutes she glanced up, flashing open-mouthed smiles. Ricky watched the odd girl with fascination while she bored holes into the makeshift sandal. He traced out the other foot and began carving. He felt weak, and his stomach knotted tighter and tighter. It was no wonder. Since yesterday's breakfast at home, he'd only eaten one bite of a burrito and 2 dried tortillas. Gripping the knife became harder. When both sandals were ready, Soledad shaved off narrow strips of inner tube to make laces, and then fed them through the holes. Deftly, she knotted the ends. With the thongs drawn tight, she proudly presented the finished product. Here, these are good for gringo feet. Ricky fitted the sandals to his feet, then stood, taking tentative steps. He had always thought huaraches were fine leather sandals. Who'd had ever thought to use old tires? His feet were still tender, but compared to walking barefoot, the sandals felt like pillows. Awesome. Thanks a lot, he said sincerely. She nodded. Your Spanish sounds different. Where are you from? Ricky ignored the question. Soledad, he asked, where is the Camacho cattle ranch? You mean Rancho Camacho? I guess. Fear and distrust clouded her face. Why do you want to know? I'm going to visit them. No, don't go to that place. There's lots of bad hombres there. How do you know? Everybody in Mariposa knows. Where are you from? I need to know where it is, he said. She eyed him suspiciously as she pointed. It's 5 kilometers that way on the road to St. Vincent. But they have bandidos with big guns. You shouldn't go. Ricky noticed her fearful eyes. I have to, he said. Nothing is so important that you have to go to Rancho Camacho, she argued. As if the matter were settled, she changed the subject. Are you hungry? She asked. I'm starved. Do you know where there's food? She smiled broadly, puffing up her flat chest like a bird on a branch. See, follow me. Turning, she scrambled off down the alley. Ricky chased awkwardly after her, his big sandals flopping. Soledad charged ahead, her chin jutted forward. Ricky couldn't believe he was chasing after her. If only he weren't so hungry. Hey, wait for me, he shouted. She stopped and turned. When he caught up, he glanced about, embarrassed to be seen with the grubby little girl. But people passed them by on the street, hardly noticing. Ricky saw his reflection in a store window, and his embarrassment deepened. He did not recognize himself. Not until he smiled and made a funny face did the image look familiar. He had not wanted to be recognized, but this bothered him. Here he felt invisible, like a piece of dirt in the street. Do you like good food? Soledad asked. She started out again. Of course, Ricky said, following. Why? She answered by angling across the street. A large new car raced toward her, blaring its horn. She walked slower, forcing the car to swerve abruptly. A smug smile creased her lips. As it passed, she turned and stuck out her tongue. Ahead, the thrum of Spanish guitar floated from inside a fancy restaurant. A trumpet sounded clear through the air. Blinking lights surrounded a huge sign over the arched doorway. Restaurant Del Sol. We'll eat here, Soledad announced. Ricky stared in disbelief as Soledad passed the front door and continued around the side of the building to the back door. She walked directly between 2 garbage cans swarming with flies. You can have that one, she said, pointing to the fullest can. Ricky stared at the can and at Soledad in numbed silence. Already, she had started burrowing through her can, stuffing chunks and bits into her mouth. She glanced up briefly. Hurry, she explained, or he'll catch us. He's eating out of a trash can right now. This is crazy. I'll see you for chapter 10.